When I decided to attend Ansgar University College, I also chose to sell my apartment in Tromsø to fund my education. I had received an estimate of the potential selling price, and if everything went well, I would have enough to cover my expenses for the entire 3 years at Ansgar. However, when my parents learned about my plans to move, they expressed dissatisfaction with their current living situation in Rorvik. They mentioned that they had few friends and several enemies, and the nearest hospital was located quite far away. They then suggested fulfilling their dream of relocating to Tromsø and purchasing my old apartment. In return, they assured me that if they were to sell the apartment eventually, I would receive a portion of the sale proceeds as a token of appreciation for selling the apartment to them. I initially declined, but my decision changed when my father called and poured out his emotions. He opened up about their challenging life in Rorvik and hinted at contemplating suicide. While he didn't directly verbalize it, it was evident that my refusal would exacerbate his distress. Despite my complicated feelings about our relationship, I still harbored concern for them. Ultimately, I made the difficult choice to sell my apartment to them and take on a student loan. My father expressed his gratitude and assured me that if they ever sold the apartment in the future, I would receive a share of the proceeds. Several years later, they indeed sold the apartment and relocated to Arendal, but my father failed to fulfill his promise to me. To buy my apartment, my parents had to sell their house, which they had built among the Viking graves. The process of selling the house took a long time, primarily because my mother had to handle most of the work to prepare the home for sale on her own. When they eventually managed to sell it, they unfortunately alienated most of the potential buyers, resulting in a price well below the original asking price. They used this money to purchase my apartment for a very low price. As I departed Tromsø that year, I felt uneasy in the pit of my stomach. My rental car was crammed with all of my belongings, and it was abundantly clear to me that I shouldn't have agreed to the sale. However, it was too late to turn back. The drive down to Ansgar took 5 days. Despite the fact that I could have completed it in 2, I chose to view it as a vacation, the first proper vacation I'd ever experienced. Living at Ansgar presented a significant challenge due to the substantial age difference between my fellow residents and me. As a mature adult with years of professional experience, adjusting to sharing living spaces and academic pursuits with young teenagers was a unique experience. While my dorm mates were outstanding individuals, but our daily lives and perspectives differed vastly. The common ground we shared was our interest in studying the Bible and theology, providing some connection amidst the generational disparity. Despite the initial loneliness of my first year at Ansgar, this situation presented an unexpected benefit: the ample time I had to devote to academic studies. However, it also brought forth a new obstacle, as I realized that I hadn't cracked open a school book in over a decade, necessitating a fresh approach to my studies and learning process. During the summer break, Ansgar's dormitories closed their doors to students and were instead made available for rental to tourists. This unforeseen development presented me with a considerable challenge, as I had yet to make arrangements for housing between the end of the school year in May and its commencement again in August. I found an unexpected solution to my problem. I reached out to my uncle, who resided in Kristiansand. Despite my father having severed ties with his 2 older brothers in the 80s for reasons unknown to me, they began to reconnect slowly after my father underwent an aortic valve replacement in 1995. My uncle readily agreed to assist me and graciously offered to store my belongings in his basement for the summer while I decided to return to Tromsø. My parents had bought my old apartment and were now living in it. They knew about my predicament, and I told them they were under no obligation to entertain me. I only needed a place to stay for the summer, and I had enough left over from my student loan to care for myself. They both expressed gratitude and thankfulness over seeing me again, so I went up to Tromsø. My father, in my mother's presence, told me it was good to see me and that he had missed me. But when we were alone, he told me I was no longer welcome because I stole my mother's attention from my brother in him. It was very confusing and disturbing to experience. After a tumultuous summer marked by my father's perplexing change in demeanor towards me and my parents' ceaseless bickering and mutual belittlement, I found myself back in Ansgar that autumn to resume my studies. The memory of my father tearing up as I departed, expressing how much he would miss me, still lingers in my mind. This touching moment sharply contrasts with an incident just a few hours prior, when my father callously declared to my face that my leaving was for the best and that I was unwelcome in the future. He callously dismissed any responsibility for my lack of accommodation during the summer. Upon my return to Ansgar after the summer, a peculiar incident occurred. As I strolled with my parents from my old apartment in Tromsø to the car awaiting to take me to the airport, an unexpected voice spoke to me. It was Jesus, and he said, "I am releasing you from being responsible for your parents. You are no longer responsible for their care." I was utterly puzzled by this message at the time, but it lingered in the depths of my consciousness. During my time at Ansgar, I experienced a sense of isolation, yet I was captivated by the stimulating and invigorating nature of the academic studies. These studies provided valuable insights into the questions I had encountered in the Bible while residing in Tromsø. Questions that had arisen during my public evangelism efforts in Tromsø, such as the belief in the Bible as the Word of God despite being written over many centuries, and the early Christians' understanding of the Trinity. Drawing from my background in social anthropology, I found it easier to grapple with the challenging concepts I encountered at Ansgar, particularly the belief in Jesus as God, which differed from the early Christians' perspective. Before long, exegesis and hermeneutics became my favorite areas of study. During my time at Ansgar, I had the wonderful opportunity to reconnect with my uncle. It was a significant moment for me because my father had two older brothers whom I never had the chance to know. In the 80s, my father made the decision to cut ties with them, so I was never able to connect with them. Regrettably, one of my uncles passed away before I had the chance to establish a relationship with him. However, it was heartening to witness my father rekindling his bond with his remaining brother. This gave me hope that one day, my own relationship with my brother could follow a similar path. I had just begun my second year at Ansgar when the unexpected news of my uncle's passing reached me. Despite the presence of my father and brother at the funeral in Kristiansand, I found myself unable to attend. My uncle had filled a paternal role in my life, and his striking resemblance to my biological father only amplified the emotional turmoil I experienced. The thought of laying to rest a figure who had been like a father to me, while sitting next to my biological father, who had deceived me about his own health, was too much to bear. Thus, I made the difficult decision to keep my distance from the funeral in order to protect my mental well-being. After being unable to attend the funeral, my father inundated me with disparaging calls and text messages, admonishing me for my absence. Despite my repeated attempts to clarify why I couldn't be there, he remained adamant. Nevertheless, I held my position and didn't yield to his demands, a decision for which I was later grateful when I learned what transpired at the funeral and in the days that followed. At the funeral, to everyone's surprise, it was revealed that my uncle had been buried in the same plot as my grandfather and grandmother, my father's parents. No one had informed my father about this decision in advance. Additionally, the tombstone had been changed without consulting my father. There are valid arguments for and against this choice, but considering my father's strained relationship with his brothers in the 80s, it's understandable why this decision was made. Following this, my father and brother bombarded my uncle's family with harassing phone calls, text messages, and letters, which escalated into a heated argument during the funeral. My future blog post will delve into how my in-depth exploration of exegesis and hermeneutics shaped my journey toward embracing Messianic Pentecostal Christianity. I will also discuss the significance of genealogy in this path and recount the personal experiences that compelled me to break away from my parents.